Well, hello, everybody. You might have noticed that yesterday's recording got cut off while we were in church due to a technical error. So this is now part two of what we discussed during Adult Ed about the Building Our Future campaign. So I'm going to pick up on what is slide 5 of the deck. And you'll want to look at the deck probably as you listen to me talk. But the idea here is that we're going to talk about requirements. The what do you want to have happen? Design, which is then how do you do it? And then obviously we get to a point of building and implementing it. And so when we look at this phasing, if you think about it, there's a very simple example of storing the clergy vestments, right? That's what we need to do. We need to have a place to store clergy vestments in the new building. And so you could say, well, there could be a closet in the sacristy, or you could put a row of hooks out in the hallway. Now, either of those are design elements options that work, right? Either of those two things will be a place to store clergy vestments. Obviously, we would look at that requirement, we would look at the design, and we would pick the design that we think is better, which presumably is a closet in a sacristy. And then we get to that build and implement phase, which is, okay, well, let's put a closet in, let's put in a 6-foot closet rod, and boom, we're done. So over the next few weeks, what we really need to be doing is focusing on making sure we know those high-level requirements that need to be met, like storing clergy vestments, and making sure that somewhere in the design of the building, that physical requirement is met. Now, because obviously what we need to do is need to get the plans to the builders who go to the contractors who then get us a cost. So that's that near-term focus and our priority here over the coming weeks. But following that, obviously, we get that design in, we know that closet rod is coming in the sacristy, we're set. But then we also need to think about, okay, well, what are we going to do with those vestments that we have right now? Are we going to get rid of some of them? Are we going to keep them all? If we're going to keep them all, are there some that we need for this intervening, let's imagine, year when we're not in our own building? How many of them will we keep? What will we do with them? Will we, put them all in storage? Will we put some in storage and throw the rest into Dana's trunk and she can drive around with her vestments? You can readily think that we might compromise there. And so that's an example of once we know what we're going to do in the new building, we then need to plan and execute what we're actually going to do with the stuff we have in our current building. Keep it, sell it, get rid of it, store it, or still be able to access it during this year when we will presumably be in interim space. So the work of these committees and these requirement teams goes beyond just saying what's the design of the building going to be, but it also then extends to saying, all right, what are we going to do to get out of the current building? What are we going to do in this interim period? And then obviously once we're through the interim period, the new building is built, how do we go get that stuff and move it into the new building? And it's not just stuff, it's again the intentionality of what are we trying to do and how will we do these things during this interim period of time. So the requirements teams are ultimately going to look at all of that. Again, we're going to start with the building piece because that's the urgent piece that we need to get into the hands of the contractors to get an estimate. But then after that, we will pick up on these other elements of what we need to do. So that's the explanation of slide 5. On slide 6, you'll see a list of design principles. And the idea is that design principles inform the decisions you make, right? And it's easier to make decisions if you have principles to guide those decisions. Now, I'm not going to read these 10 items to you on the page, but I'll touch on a couple of them that we covered in the session live. One was maximizing usage of space to be used 24/7, 365. Every time you're in the building, this space is used, right? And so there will be very little space that's dedicated to a single function, right? And my example of this is the bathrooms. Now, anytime there's somebody in the building, the bathroom is a bathroom and it's dedicated to that purpose. Can't be anything else. That's a good dedicated space. Other than that, I'm not sure there's much else that's dedicated, right? How can we use all spaces flexibly as we use the building? And as we design and as we think about our future rate, we don't want to be locked into just what we do today. We want to assume that even today, things will vary over time. Things will change over time. Our usage of the space will change over time for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we don't want to do anything that locks us into any one thing. We want to use the stuff we have and reuse the stuff we have. I don't think anybody's looking to just, buy everything new. But we also don't want to design around any single element, any single thing that we have. Because honestly, right, we should be open to change. And that actually is the last bullet point on this slide is everything theoretically is on the table for change. But we also know we can't change everything. So if we want to use something, keep something that we have, let's use it intentionally in a way that makes sense. Another thing to think about is with all this flexible space, we have to design for an ease of operations. It has to be easy to move things around. Physically, they have to have a place where they go. You don't want to just dump stuff in a corner. It's got to have a place to go. Then you pull it back out, and it's got to be designed in a way that whatever that is, whether it's a chair, that it can handle being put away, it can handle being opened up, on a regular basis. We've got to make it easy for ourselves to do that. So that'll be definitely one of the things top of mind. Another example, going back to what we just talked about, was we might meet requirements different ways. Again, we might all imagine the clergy vestments in a sacristy, but it's possible to say that maybe hanging them in the hallway is the best option, right? So we can meet requirements different ways, and we got to be open to that. That, okay, maybe that's not how I thought it was going to be, but I see this is how this can work. So that's another key idea here. Last one I'll just touch on is, we do have to assume that multiple things are going on in the space at the same time, right? Today we have a very big building. We can spread out. We may be more compact. We may be right next to each other. So if you're doing children's chapel next to the sanctuary and the children's chapel is loud and raucous, right? Then, or maybe the sanctuary is loud and raucous, depending, right? You got to make sure you've got the barriers there so that one doesn't interfere with the other. And by barriers, I mean sound and noise containment, things like that. So those are just the principles that we'll use and apply. And I made a comment yesterday that these are not the 10 Commandments. And if you have feedback on these or an 11th or 12th, you would add, by all means, share that feedback because there's nothing perfect about these. They're not perfectly formed or perfectly shaped, but they're a good going in position of what are the principles we want to follow as we go into this design work. So the last piece that we talked about, which is slide 7, and kind of a reiteration of slide 4, is this is where we need help and where we want to invite people in to help. You can write to buildingourfuture@nativityMN.org. And again, we're looking at help on the Capital Campaign Committee for sure, and then on each of the 6 requirements subcommittees. A couple of points that we touched on during the Q&A that I'll bring up here. One was, the Liturgical and Music Requirements Committee. That is an evolution of an existing committee. There are people already there. They're actually having their first meeting Tuesday. But again, it's an existing committee that's evolved. And I think there's a little bit of a criteria there for that committee to say, if you're one of those people who attended that liturgy workshops that we had last fall and really have a deep sense of what are we trying to do with liturgy and make this space serve that, we're welcome to engage. But there's definitely a little bit of a science to that, if you will. So keep that in mind. As for the other committees, again, the church operations is about office space, administrative space, meeting space. It actually covers other people who use the building as well. So if you've got understanding there and ideas there, fabulous. Faith formation, I think, speaks for itself. Garden and exterior, we're going to figure out what our partnership is with Episcopal Church Homes on that. Obviously, that's a little bit less likely in the near term to impact the physical building space. Right, it's the outside space, and that you kind of deal with once the building is done and the tractors are all gone. But there will be some planning there as well, but it's a little less intense in terms of what we're actually going to construct. In a similar way, the decor and design requirements, again, that's going to happen a little bit more after We know how the building is going to look, because you think of that as the softer things, paint colors, um, uh, you know, window treatments, furnishings, things that, tying that all together is obviously going to be important and relevant, but it's not stuff that impacts, again, the physical construct of the building. And then last, I think I didn't touch on the hospitality and kitchen team. Again, that is one where we need to know those requirements up front. And, how do we do gatherings? How do we do receptions? How do we, do family table or whatever? What are those requirements and those needs there? So again, we welcome participation and input across any of those, like I just described. Um, the other question that came up was, if you say you can help, do you have to help for this next 2 years? And my answer to that question is generally speaking, yes. I think we're assuming that people who put a lot of energy now into thinking about what we're going to do and what that building is going to look like are obviously going to hopefully help us migrate, plan for that, get into the details of that, migrate to, the interim space, and then ultimately migrate into the new space. Now, again, we know we can't always tie people in for 2 years and life happens. That's not the issue. But ideally, this would be a longer commitment, because you want to see what you've designed and what you believe needs to happen come to fruition, both, again, in an interim time and in a permanent move back into the new space. So that's the idea. The other question that came up was, can we be on more than one committee? And I think the answer to that is yes. And it depends on, what your time is available, and how much energy you have, and capacity you have to contribute in that way. Um, and I think that was it. And I, apologize obviously that we didn't get it recorded right, but that's just what happened. So this was the supplement, to kind of carry us through. And again, thanks for your time. And if you're interested, there's the link on slide number 7. Thanks.